The saloon doors slammed open, laughter spilling into the dusty street like poison. A drunken ranch hand spat in the dirt, pointing at a lone figure walking past. "Look at her," he sneered, his voice thick with contempt. "Ain't no man fool enough to touch that cursed woman. She's bad luck, through and through." The crowd chuckled, and whispers followed Lillian Rose like a trail of rattlesnakes. Once, she'd been as radiant as the morning sun, but betrayal had left her hollow. She was the town's favorite target, deserted, disgraced, and shamed beyond measure. Women turned their heads when she passed, clutching their children closer, as though her scars were contagious. Men smirked, tossing cruel jokes like stones. "Should have run her out of Dusty Creek years ago," Abigail Turner's voice cut sharp from the saloon steps. The town's gossip queen leaned against the post, her lips curled with malice. "But she ain't worth the effort." Dirt belongs with dirt. Lillian kept walking, her chin trembling but never bowed. The dust clung to her dress, the heat pressed down on her shoulders, and every whisper carved another wound she thought she'd stopped feeling. She had no family, no friends, no one to defend her name. Only the silence of survival. And yet, beneath the scorn and spit, something still flickered in her chest. A stubborn flame, faint, almost gone, but not dead. What no one in Dusty Creek knew was this: fate was about to ride into town, and the woman they tried to bury would soon rise higher than any of them dared to imagine. Before we dive into the story, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we've got an extra special story waiting for you. One that'll touch your heart and blow your mind. Don't miss it. The morning sun spilled over Dusty Creek, turning the wooden storefronts gold. But for Lillian Rose, there was no warmth in it. She carried a small basket of mended clothes to the general store, her boots crunching against the dirt road. Each step was met with sideways glances, smirks, and muttered insults. On the porch of the mercantile, two women pretended to fan themselves, their whispers slicing sharper than knives. "She's got no shame walking round like that," one hissed. "Poor thing. Don't you dare pity her. She earned every bit of disgrace that clings to her." Inside, the storekeeper barely looked at her. He set her payment down on the counter like she was diseased, careful not to let their hands touch. "Best you don't linger," he muttered, eyes shifting to the door. Children stared at her as she left, and one boy shouted, "Witch!" before his mother yanked him back. Lillian's face burned, but she kept moving, clutching the basket like armor. Across the street, Sheriff Briggs leaned against his office rail, watching silently. His expression was neither cruel nor kind. It was the face of a man unwilling to take sides. That indifference stung worst of all. And there, on the saloon balcony, Abigail Turner smirked down like a queen surveying her conquered enemy. Her voice rang out, dripping with venom. "Dusty Creek's very own ghost. Mark my words, she'll fade away sooner than later." The crowd laughed. Lillian didn't. She just kept walking, shoulders heavy, heart heavier, believing that maybe they were right. The midday heat shimmered over Dusty Creek when the sound of hoofbeats echoed down the road. Heads turned as a tall rider appeared on the horizon, dust trailing behind him like a banner. He rode with the steady confidence of a man who had weathered storms far greater than the desert sun. His name was Jackson Cole. He pulled his horse to a stop outside the saloon, dismounting in one smooth motion. Broad-shouldered, sun-bronzed, his hat shadowing a pair of steady eyes. There was no swagger in him, only a quiet strength that drew stares all the same. Men at the tables muttered. Women peeked from behind curtains. In a town where everyone knew everyone, a stranger was cause for curiosity. As Jackson tied his reins, his gaze caught on movement across the street. Lillian rose, her basket clutched tight, trying to slip past the jeers of a pair of loafers leaning on the hitching post. "Careful, stranger," one of them called to Jackson with a smirk. "Don't let that one's shadow cross yours. Folks say it brings nothing but bad luck." Laughter followed, sharp and ugly. Lillian froze, her cheeks flushing, the sting of humiliation as fresh as the first time she'd heard it. But Jackson didn't laugh. his brow furrowed, his gaze steady on her, like he saw something no one else bothered to. Without a word, he tipped his hat politely in her direction. Simple. Respectful. The street fell oddly quiet for a moment, the gesture striking deeper than any insult. Lillian blinked, stunned. No one had looked at her like that in years, and though neither spoke, something had shifted. Dusty Creek just didn't know it yet. The saloon doors swung wide as Jackson Cole stepped inside, dust still clinging to his boots. The piano player faltered, curious eyes tracking the newcomer as he ordered a whiskey and leaned against the bar. Abigail Turner, in her crimson dress, slid up with a smile too sweet to be honest. "You're a long way from home, cowboy," she purred. "Looking for cattle? Or trouble?" Jackson answered with a faint smile but said nothing. His gaze drifted toward the door, where Lillian Rose had paused, basket in hand, debating whether to risk stepping inside for the bread she needed. The laughter began before she crossed the threshold. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. Surprised she dares show her face round here." The bar roared with cruel amusement. Lillian's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to the counter, placing a few coins down with trembling fingers. The barkeep hesitated, then swiped the coins like they were tainted. That's when Jackson's voice cut through the noise, low, steady, commanding. "Pour the lady a drink," he said, eyes locked on the bartender. "On my tab." The room went still. A ranch hand snorted. "You don't know what you're doing, stranger. That one's poison." Jackson turned, his jaw set, his voice like steel. "Funny thing," he said. "Poison usually kills. But all I see is a woman still standing, while cowards waste their breath tearing her down." The silence that followed was heavier than gun smoke. Abigail's smile faltered. The barkeep shifted uncomfortably, and Lillian, speechless, stared at the cowboy who'd just shattered the walls of her exile. For the first time in years, someone had stood beside her, and the town of Dusty Creek didn't know how to handle it. The next morning, Lillian Rose sat alone by the well at the edge of town, mending a torn shirt with weary fingers. The echo of Jackson's words in the saloon still clung to her mind, like a melody she didn't know how to trust. No man had ever spoken for her, not since her world had been stripped bare. The sound of hoofbeats drew near. She tensed, bracing for mockery. But it was him. Jackson Cole reined in his horse, the rising sun catching the brim of his hat. He dismounted slowly, careful not to startle her, and stood with the calmness of a man who had nothing to prove. "Morning, Miss Rose," he said, his tone easy, respectful. "Reckon you've carried more than your share of burdens. Thought maybe a change of scenery might do you some good." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring. "What are you after, Mr. Cole? Pity?" Jackson shook his head. "Not pity. I'm offering work, fresh air, a chance to breathe someplace where the world don't whisper every time you pass by." He gestured toward the horizon, where the open plains stretched wide and free. "My ranch could use an extra hand. Someone steady." Lillian's breath caught. His words were simple, but they cracked open a door she'd nailed shut long ago. Yet fear coiled around her heart. She'd been used, betrayed, left behind before. "I don't belong anywhere," she whispered, almost to herself. Jackson's gaze softened. "Then maybe it's time you found someplace you do." For the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a lie. The prairie stretched wide under a sky painted with streaks of gold and crimson. Lillian rode beside Jackson, her posture stiff, every hoofbeat of his horse echoing the storm in her chest. She hadn't been beyond Dusty Creek in years, not since her name became a curse on every tongue. Now, the endless fields felt like a world she'd forgotten, wild, open, free. Jackson's ranch came into view, weathered fences, cattle grazing in the distance, and a sturdy barn that stood like a sentinel against the horizon. The place was alive, humming with honest labor. For Lillian, it was like stepping into another life altogether. A wiry man with sun-browned skin waved from the corral. "Boss!" he called, grinning wide. Thought you'd gone and left me to wrangle the whole herd alone. Sam Whitaker, Jackson said with a chuckle. Meet Miss Lillian Rose. Sam tipped his hat politely, no judgment in his eyes, just curiosity. Pleasure, ma'am. If the boss brought you here, reckon you're tougher than you look. The remark startled a laugh from Lillian, small but genuine, and Sam's grin widened like he'd struck gold. Jackson led her through the barn, showing her the tack, the feed, the rhythm of ranch life. Everything smelled of leather, hay, and earth, a far cry from the sour whiskey stench of the saloon. This ain't charity, Jackson told her quietly as they walked. You'll work. You'll earn. And no one here will treat you less than you are. For the first time in years, Lillian felt the weight on her shoulders ease. Just a little. The ranch didn't care about her past. And maybe, just maybe, neither did the man who brought her here. The sun blazed high over the prairie, the scent of wild sage drifting on the wind. Jackson stood beside a chestnut mare, reins in hand, while Lillian lingered near the corral fence, arms folded tight. I ain't been on a horse since... She stopped, swallowing the memory that threatened to surface. Since before everything fell apart. Jackson's voice was calm, steady as the earth. Then it's time you remembered what it feels like. A horse don't care what folks say. They only know the hand that holds 'em. Lillian hesitated, fear and pride warring inside her. She half expected him to push, to demand. But he didn't. He simply waited, patient as stone. Finally, with a shaky breath, she stepped forward. Jackson laced his fingers to give her a boost, his touch firm but respectful. She mounted awkwardly, gripping the saddle horn like her life depended on it. The mare shifted, and her heart pounded, but Jackson's voice cut through the panic. Easy now. Breathe. Trust her. Trust yourself. The horse moved into a slow trot. Dust kicked up, the prairie stretching wide around her. For the first time in years, the weight of shame and scorn slipped from her shoulders. She wasn't the outcast of Dusty Creek. She was simply Lillian, alive and free beneath the open sky. A laugh burst from her lips, surprised and bright, carried on the wind. Jackson smiled, tipping his hat as he walked beside her. There she is, he said softly, almost to himself. And in that moment, with the wind in her hair and the sound of her own laughter echoing across the plains, Lillian Rose felt the first crack in the walls around her heart. The sound of piano music spilled from the saloon that evening, mingling with the laughter of cowhands fresh off the trail. Inside, Abigail Turner leaned against the bar, her crimson dress catching the lamplight like fire. Her lips curved in that familiar, cruel smile as she held court with the townsfolk. Seen her? She drawled, swirling her glass. Lillian Rose, riding around Cole's ranch like she owns the place. Poor Cowboy don't know what kind of snake he's brought under his roof. The men chuckled, egged on by her venom. One spat into the sawdust. He'll regret it. Woman like that ain't good for nothing but trouble. Abigail's voice dropped lower, silken and sharp. She's a curse in a dress, and mark my words, Jackson Cole won't be so noble when he learns the truth of her past. The whispers spread like wildfire, carried down the streets, through the general store, past the church steps. By morning, half of Dusty Creek was buzzing with it. Wherever Lillian went, fetching feed, carrying supplies, she felt the weight of their stares. She heard the words behind her back. Desperate. Shameless. Used. Each one struck harder than the last, tearing at the fragile hope she'd begun to build. By the time she reached the edge of Jackson's ranch, her hands trembled on the basket she carried. The warmth she'd felt only days ago now threatened to slip away. She feared he'd heard the whispers too, and that he, like everyone else, would turn his back when it mattered most. For Lillian Rose, the past wasn't done haunting her. Not yet. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer echoed down Dusty Creek's main street as Jackson tied off his horse outside the general store. He had just stepped onto the boardwalk when a shadow stretched across his path. Sheriff Walter Briggs stood there, arms folded, his badge glinting in the sun. Cole, the sheriff said, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of law and years. "We need a word." Jackson adjusted his hat, unbothered. "Then say it." Briggs's eyes narrowed. "You've been keeping company with Lillian Rose. I won't tell a man where to spend his time, but I'll tell you this. Dusty Creek don't forgive easy. Folks here see her as trouble, and if you stand with her, they'll paint you the same." Jackson leaned against a post, arms crossed. "Funny. I thought a man's worth came from his own hands, not from the gossip of cowards." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Careful, son. A rancher's name is everything in these parts. You lose that, you lose trade, respect, maybe even your place here. Is she worth it?" The question hung heavy in the air. Jackson's gaze didn't waver. "Worth it?" he said, voice firm as iron. "Sheriff, that woman stood against more storms than half this town ever could. She's worth 10 of the people whispering her down." Briggs studied him for a long moment, then exhaled, almost grudgingly. "You're either a fool, Cole, or the only man in this town with guts." The sheriff walked away, boots crunching on the dirt. Jackson stayed where he was, jaw set, knowing he'd just drawn his line in the sand. And for Lillian Rose, that line meant everything. The sky darkened without warning, black clouds rolling over the prairie like a tidal wave. The wind howled, snapping fence posts and rattling the barn doors. Jackson bolted from the porch, hat pulled low. "Storm's coming hard," he shouted. "Cattle'll scatter if we don't move fast." Sam was already saddling up, but before Jackson could call for more help, Lillian appeared in the doorway, skirts whipping in the wind. "What can I do?" Jackson hesitated. "This ain't your fight. I'm not standing idle while everything you've built gets torn apart." Her voice cut sharp against the thunder. That was all it took. Within moments, she was on horseback, riding hard beside them into the chaos. Rain pelted down, turning the earth to mud, lightning splitting the sky. The herd bawled in terror, surging toward broken fencing. "Drive 'em back!" Jackson yelled. Lillian's heart hammered, but she gritted her teeth, guiding her mount straight into the storm. She shouted, waved her arms, cut off the stragglers before they bolted into the night. Fear clawed at her throat, but she pressed on, soaked to the bone, unyielding. When a calf slipped into the flood-swollen ditch, Lillian leapt from her horse without thinking. Mud sucked at her boots as she hauled the bawling creature to higher ground, rain stinging her eyes. Jackson saw, his chest tightening with something fiercer than admiration. By dawn, the herd was safe, huddled in the corral. Exhausted, dripping wet, Lillian stood trembling but unbroken. Sam clapped her shoulder with a grin. "Miss Rose," he said, breathless, "you just saved half the ranch." For the first time, Jackson saw her not as the woman beaten down by whispers, but as the storm's conqueror. The morning sun burned away the last traces of storm clouds, leaving Dusty Creek washed clean. At the general store, the talk was different now. Instead of the usual sneers, folks spoke in low, thoughtful tones. "Did you hear? That Rose girl near drowned saving Cole's calf. Storm like that would have scattered the herd for miles if not for her. Never thought she had it in her." Abigail Turner, perched by the window with a sour expression, tried to laugh it off. One good deed don't change a woman's history. But her words fell flat this time. The men nodded at one another, not at her. The shift had begun. Sheriff Briggs watched from the boardwalk, arms folded. He'd heard the reports too, and though suspicion lingered in his eyes, there was no denying Lillian had done what half the town wouldn't dare. Back at the ranch, Lillian felt the change in the air. When she rode into town with Jackson to fetch supplies, she caught the nod of Old Man Harris at the blacksmith's, the soft smile of Mrs. Porter as she handed her a loaf of bread. Gestures so small, yet so powerful after years of cold shoulders. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "They'll turn on me again," she whispered to Jackson as they loaded the wagon. He touched her hand, steady and firm. "Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But today, they saw the truth. That's something no gossip can erase." For the first time in years, Lillian allowed herself to believe she might belong. not just to Jackson's world, but to Dusty Creek itself. The sun dipped low, painting Dusty Creek in gold and amber. The town square buzzed with activity, but all eyes turned when Jackson Cole rode up beside Lillian Rose, who sat tall in her saddle, confidence radiating from every line of her posture. Abigail Turner appeared at the saloon steps, lips twisted in disdain. "You think you belong here, Rose? After everything?" she spat, voice sharp as barbed wire. Jackson dismounted, standing between Lillian and the crowd. "No, ma'am," he said, voice steady and strong. "She doesn't belong to the past folks tried to bury her in. She belongs right here, right now. And anyone with eyes can see she's worth every ounce of respect in Dusty Creek." The townsfolk went silent. Whispers flickered like fire in the cool evening air. Faces that once sneered now softened, acknowledging her strength. Even Sheriff Briggs gave a slow nod of approval, tipping his hat. Jackson took Lillian's hand, lifting it gently. "I love her. Not in spite of her past, but because of the strength it gave her. And anyone who can't see that, well, that's their problem, not hers." A hush fell over the town. Lillian felt tears prick at her eyes, not of shame, but of liberation. The weight she'd carried for years dissolved like dust in the wind. Jackson leaned close, his lips brushing her temple. "We start fresh," he whispered. "Together." And in that golden light, with the prairie stretching endlessly behind them, Lillian Rose finally believed it. The girl who had been deserted, shamed, and broken had risen. Stronger, braver, and loved beyond measure. Dusty Creek would never forget it. Lillian Rose rises from betrayal and scorn, finding love and strength with Jackson Cole. A tale of courage, redemption, and a love that defies the odds. Experience love, heartbreak, and hope in the untamed Wild West. Subscribe to Wild West Eternal Love and ride through stories of danger, passion, and hearts that never give up.